I was thinking about behaviour sequences the other day, and my mind took me back to when I very first started working with dog behaviour when I was in Northern Ireland, and I was asked to help a golden retriever that was really struggling in kennels. This dog was a fantastic dog. He was so loving and friendly and happy, and in all but one area he was just the perfect boy. But when he went into boarding kennels, he really struggled. He became so aggressive. It was really very difficult to manage him. And nobody knew that he had this problem until one day when he'd been left in kennels while his owners went on holiday. Of course, this is not a great time for this to happen. The kennels were able to manage him as best as they could, and they looked after him as best as they could. But when they came back, they said to the family, unfortunately, that they would not be able to take him anymore because of his behaviour and how bad it was, unless they got some help. And thankfully, they gave the family, my number. So I went out and met with them. And he was such a lovely dog, but whenever he did go into kennels, he went into this kind of a fight or flight mode. He was in a survival mode, and when he went into that mode, the thinking part of his brain got switched off, and he was just reacting in a keep myself safe kind of way. So there was no real long-term plan. There was no thought process about what he was trying to achieve with this behaviour. All his brain was trying to do was keep him safe. So that made him very defensive. So why does a behaviour sequence help here? Well, a behaviour sequence is a set of behaviours that lead from one place to the next. So for example, if you decided just now that you were going to take your dog out for a walk, you might get out the chair by slamming your hands down either side of yourself and saying, right. And your dog immediately would go, is that the behaviour sequence triggered? And he would become suspicious. And then you would walk to the back door and you'd pick up your dog walking shoes, not your work shoes. Now he's starting to think this is it. We are definitely getting a walk. You'll see that his behaviour will start to change. Maybe there'll be some other trigger words, like you'll actually say the word walk, or maybe you'll spell it for him, because perhaps you think he's smarter than that and he won't understand how you spell it. Perhaps you've got a specific set of keys. Maybe you shout up the stairs to somebody to say you're leaving. Do you empty your cup into the sink? Do you turn the TV off? Everything that happens between that moment that the dog has noticed that the behaviour sequence has been triggered to the time he gets out for a walk is all part of the sequence. And every step of that sequence builds his expectation about what's happening next. So when we were in the boarding kennels, one of the first things I wanted to do was to change his expectations by introducing a behaviour sequence that was different to anything he'd seen before, but had always led to something good happening. So what we did at home was we had this dog in his garden, and his owner would hold on to the dog, and I would come around one side of him and I would call his name and throw a treat at him, and then I would run around the front, call his name and throw a treat at him. So he's turning around this way and this way and this way and this way, and he's watching me come forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards with this treat. And he thought this was the best game ever, and he had no idea what was happening. He was just having a fun time, and this strange woman in his garden was just running around in circles throwing treats at him. But this behaviour sequence was really important because he associated this with fun stuff and happy stuff, and his family were there and everything else. So he wasn't suspicious about it at all. And then when we went into the kennels, I asked the kennels specifically to put him on an end position. And the kennels that they had there had a front and back opening. So when we went into the kennels, we popped him in his kennel and left him. And of course, immediately he started to be very aggressive. But the kennel area was very safe. Obviously, there were lots of fences and gates, and I just started playing this game. So I went round to the back of the kennel and I called his name and threw his treat through the fence, and he came out. And then I ran back around the other side, called his name, threw a treat through the fence. And I did this quite a few times until eventually his brain kind of went, oh, I recognize this sequence, this behavior. I recognize all of this stuff, this little game, and I quite like it. And then he would start picking up the treats, and then he would start running backwards and forwards. And slowly, as I did this backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, his body language would start to soften, and he would actually start to enjoy it. Until one time that I came around to the front of the kennel, and instead of throwing the treat through the fence, I opened the gate, stepped inside and gave him his treat, and he was happy. And what we'd done that day was taught him a different way to behave in kennels, which was actually better than what he was doing. He was trying to protect himself and keep himself safe, but actually there was nothing to be scared of. But because he'd got himself into that mindset, he wasn't able to get himself out of it. All we needed to do was find a way to get him out of that mindset and to relax. And by experiencing this game that we were playing, that broke down that feeling of anxiety, until eventually I came into his kennel and he realised that everything was all right. And he was so calm and relaxed by then, and I could just put a lead on and take him out. And from that moment forward, he stopped worrying about kennels, because his irrational reaction had been proven to him to be wrong. And he hadn't had a lot of experience in kennels, so we didn't need to repeat this too often. But yeah, so that's a really good example of a behaviour sequence. Of course, when I knew him back then, I didn't know that's what a behaviour sequence was. All I knew is that we had to change his expectations of what was happening when people were coming around him and coming near him, and we had to change his feelings about the place that he was in. Since then, of course, I've done lots of research on neurobiology and things like that, and now I know that's what it's called. So I'm just really pleased to be able to recall that story. So if you're wondering what a behaviour sequence is and how powerful it can be, hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care.